I'm going to invite my dear colleague and friend, Charlene Spretnak, to come up to the stage right now. I mentioned to you before that Charlene is someone who influences my own thinking, and I wanted you to have the blessing of hearing her yourself. She is a thinker who does not think in patterns that are predictable. She forges new paths. And as she does that, like I said, I always feel like just being in her presence and hearing her just make comments, it's been deeply influential for me, and I know that it will be for you as well. Charlene is also the co-founder of the Green Party movement in the United States. Later at our political panel, you will hear someone speak from the Green Party. In 2006, Charlene Spretnak was named by the British government's Environment Department as one of the 100 eco-heroes of all time. In 2012, she received the Demeter Award for Lifetime Achievement as one of the premier visionary feminist thinkers of our time from the Association for the Study of Women and Mythology. She hosts a weekly radio program all together now on the Progressive Radio Network, PRN.FM. And I want to hold up the book of hers that we have here on sale today. It's called Relational Reality, New Discoveries of Interrelatedness That Are Transforming the Modern World. Bill McKibben, and many people know his name, has called it a vital book. Ladies and gentlemen, please join with me in welcoming my friend, and I know very shortly yours too, Charlene Spretnak.
Good morning, sisters. When Marianne told me she was cooking up this event, I was so delighted, and I'm really honored to be a part of it. What I'm going to do in the next half hour is tell you about a giant relational shift that's begun to move through all our institutions and all our systems of knowledge, just within the past few years, really. And then I'll suggest some ways that that's relevant to governance and policy, and ways that it's relevant to women. So, for those of you old enough to remember, there were a number of best-selling books in the 1970s and the 80s and 90s, and these were about discoveries in different branches of science. First physics, and then chaos theory, and then complexity studies. And the discoveries were that reality is much more dynamically interrelated, holistic, than our mechanistic worldview we were taught in modern schooling had assumed. It's not a matter of everything being separative, discrete entities that maybe get together once in a while, be in relationship or not. That's not the way it works. So the point of those books was, this new knowledge is now going to flow out from the sciences into society and cause a big, grand, holistic makeover of everything. But as you can look around and see, our institutions did not have a big makeover. And I think looking back, maybe those discoveries were too abstract for most people to pay attention to and relate to. Obviously, the one example of a partial success was in alternative medicine, then called complementary medicine and now integrative medicine. It was eventually and grudgingly given a place in mainstream medicine, but most of the doctors and research physicians still felt they were operating at an elevated level, thinking about such things as the latest discoveries in microbiology and having nothing to do with that noise around the edges. So about 10 years ago, I actually started wondering if I might not see this shift off the mechanistic worldview onto a holistic relational worldview in my own lifetime. I thought, well, it's going to happen, but maybe it's going to take a lot longer than we thought. And then in 2004, I saw a small article in a newspaper. It was in the LA Times, actually. And then a few weeks later, I saw another one, and it was rather similar about a new discovery. And the next month, another one. And in the coming months and years, I kept seeing these and clipping them out and collecting them. And these are some examples of what those articles were saying. And these are from a grouping of what I call relational physiology. So the first one was a study of 906 elderly adults found that those with fewer friendships and other social interactions experienced a more rapid decline in motor function, such as walking, gripping, and balancing. And in another study, researchers ascertained that for people of all ages, 10 minutes of talking with someone, either in person or even on the phone, increased their mental performance and memory on a test, as much as doing crossword puzzles for 10 minutes before taking the test did. Moreover, it was found that the more social contact people have, the higher their level of mental functioning. Having friends has also been found to be a strong preventative factor in avoiding dementia. Here's another one. It's always been held, because of a mechanistic assumption about the human body-mind, that we arrive in this world with a fixed level of inherited mental ability. That assumption is being overthrown by several recent studies, which have found that our IQ is not solely a matter of what sort of brain we're born with, because numerous relational factors in infancy and throughout childhood affect the formation of an adult's IQ level. For instance, researchers now hypothesize that although breast milk itself does contain several neurosugars that are highly beneficial for the infant's developing brain, it's the hours of interaction between the mother and the nursing infant in which numerous types of relational information are exchanged through the eyes, voice, touch, body warmth, and other body language that stimulate brain development in ways that a baby bottle with a plastic nipple does not. Another example of relational physiology, the biomechanical model of the human was never able to explain why some people catch cold and others don't, even if they wash their hands a lot, eat right, get a lot of sleep. But, and this was because, of course, the biomechanical theory always held that the presence of a virus or bad bacteria causes the illness in you, period. It's a simple mechanistic deduction. But a study at Carnegie Mellon gave the participants a survey first, asking how many friends and social contacts they have, and then they sprayed a coal virus directly into the nasal passages of the people in the study. And they found that those people with a rich social network were 4 times less likely to come down with a cold after they received the virus. So that is, most people have heard by now that it's kind of good for you to have friends, helps your health in general. This shows how really significant that is. And here's another one. There was a study reported in the media just last spring. This is really interesting. It found that children who are exposed to violence, whether being physically abused or even just witnessing violence in their surroundings, experience a shortening of the genetic structure in their cells called telomeres that is similar to what goes on in the aging process. Moreover, the more types of violence a child has experienced, the faster her or his telomeres in the cells eroded, shortening their lives by 7 to 10 years, and perhaps explaining partially why they face a heightened risk of mental and physical disorders as adults. So yes, direct or even observed violence affects the human body-mind at the cellular level. This is what I call relational physiology. And in related studies, it's been found cross-culturally that spanking lowers IQ. It's such a huge relational trauma to the body-mind of the child during the developmental years. Now here are just a few examples. They're also about relational physiology, but they're about the dynamic relationship between the human body, mind, and nature. You've probably heard that people who work in daylighted buildings get sick less often than those whose workplace does not have much natural light. All types of light, different light bulbs, they're not the same for us. We have a dynamic relationship with sunlight, and we respond to that. And in a related vein, myopia has increased tremendously since children have been raised by staring at those glowing screens during their developmental years. In the last 4 decades, it's up by more than 66%. But this one study found that no matter how much time 12-year-olds spent on a computer screen or video game screen, if they ran around outdoors in the sun for at least 2.5 hours a day, which hardly any children do anymore, they were much less likely to develop myopia than the other group, spending less time or no time outdoors. And another discovery, this one is about people living in public housing projects in Chicago. Some were near trees and some were not. So they found that living near green open spaces decreased the incidence in urban residents of depression, anxiety, a range of diseases such as asthma, diabetes, intestinal problems, and back and neck pains. And in fact, many recent studies on the dynamic interrelatedness of nature and human health are the reason that hospitals now have so much nature-based decor. If you've been in a hospital recently, you've probably noticed that the curtains have leaf patterns, and they've put big pictures of mountain scenes on the walls in the rooms and the hallways, and they have little fountains with the water running over rocks, at the nurse's station. And before you're rolled into an MRI, if you look up, it's probable that the ceiling has been painted blue with white clouds. So why have they done all that? It's because of all these studies that have definitely established that for humans, connecting with nature speeds our healing process. And also in a series of 4 studies, people who were shown slides of entirely human-made environments were surveyed afterwards and ranked money, fame, and/or power as the highest values. But people who were shown slides of nature photography afterward ranked caring, generosity, and personal relationships and community as their prime values. Nature enables us to be our true, caring, generous, and expansive selves. It seems to free us of self-absorption, disengagement, and diminished empathy. As I came across these studies, as I say, I would clip them out of the newspaper or download them from the internet, and pretty soon I had bulging files, and I saw there was definitely a coherence. Something was happening here, which you don't see if you just read the little article and turn the page. So, as Marianne mentioned, that's why I drew it together and made this book, Relational Reality, that came out last year. I focused just on 4 big areas. The relational shift that, because of these new discoveries, is now changing the institutions and systems of thinking. But it's really happening in all areas. I just didn't want to, turn it into an encyclopedia. So let me give you just a few examples from one different area. This is education. A study of schools in Chicago found that a relational ambiance, that is, the presence of relational trust among teachers, students, administration, and parents, was a far more significant indicator of academic success than were material indicators, such as money or even class size. Although I think class size is really important, especially for younger children. But that's because it gives the teacher, the really good teachers, if you look back on your early years in school, the really good teachers created a relationship with every child, a warm relationship with the young children, and that works better in a smaller classroom. Also, it's been found that emotional well-being enables better learning. See, these are relational factors necessary for learning that have been overlooked. But to help children cultivate thought patterns of happiness and well-being so that they can learn better, some schools now teach ways to develop mental happiness habits, and these are essentially relational skills. Examples include the habit of gratitude. Start every day by thinking about someone or something in your life for whom you have a deep appreciation. Repeat the practice right before lunch. End the day by thinking about something that happened that day that you appreciate. And another happiness pattern is thoughtfulness. Do something for someone every day. And then the third habit of happiness is optimism, curbing negative self-talk and focusing on possibilities. An even more comprehensive way to map the relational factors necessary for learning is to focus on helping children develop resilience, which is understood simply as the ability to spring back from and successfully adapt to adversity. And recent research in the psychology of learning has found that the efforts to bounce back from intense stress, trauma, low self-esteem, and at-risk behavior are far more likely to be successful if the student has certain conditions in his or her life. Nearly all the techniques for developing resiliency are relational. That is, they're about cultivating relationships in the school and elsewhere in the child's life. And then at the college level today, students are taking classes with titles like Relational Philosophy, the Relational Model of the Self, Relational History, Relational Geography, Relational Economics, Relational Rights and Responsibilities in Political and Legal Theory, Relational Theory for Social Work. Many of the sciences and nearly all the life sciences have entered into a state of transition focused on the discovery of relational complexity. And that brings me to my last example, which is really astounding. The entire field of microbiology is right now in the process of going off the mechanistic model of what they were looking at and onto a model of dynamic interrelatedness. There was an article in the New Yorker just 2 weeks ago about this. And it quotes a lot of the researchers and doctors saying, oh, yeah, we were kind of arrogant about that. I'm reading that saying, yes, and? They were, very confident that the presence of a bad bacteria causes the bacterial inflammation, which causes the disease. So all you need to do is go in there and carpet bomb the whole human biome with a broad-spectrum antibiotic, which will kill the bad bacteria. And there's collateral damage. It kills everything else, but it's just bacteria. So that's the way they worked for years. And now they've discovered that the difference between people who have a bacteria-based illness and people who don't is not necessarily the presence of the bad bacteria. Both groups may have the bad bacteria in their intestinal tract or their sinuses or somewhere else. But the difference is that the people who get sick are lacking a particular good bacteria that the well people have in their system. So they have found that just the presence of the good bacteria suppresses or takes care of the bad bacteria. So now there's going to be a scramble to develop probiotics that have these certain good bacteria in them. Meanwhile, though, yeah, it's good news. It's a little late for a lot of people whose, microbiome has been completely wrecked several times, as I say, and that explains the public health question of why are we seeing these epidemics? Because the presence of the good bacteria is necessary to head off diseases, or let's say the lack of the good bacteria has been found connected to, it's a factor in obesity, asthma. These are the epidemics. Crohn's disease and other chronic illnesses. Because when people are giving antibiotics as children, then it lessens every time what they naturally would have. We pick up hundreds of thousands of species. As soon as we leave the womb, which is the only bacteria-free part of the body, we start picking up all these bacteria that we need. It's like we've got 3 pounds of bacteria we pick up after we're born. So they're just starting to see this. And in the article, it's very interesting. They say, oh, we see now, and here's a direct quote from one of the doctors, we have to stop looking at medicine as a war between invading pathogens and our bodies. The new stewardship model has more in common with park management The new perspective is that the body is a highly mutable ecosystem, and medicine becomes what he calls a matter of cultivation. Well, yes. So from all this, we can see that the quality of our knowing depends on the quality of our awareness of the relationships involved in any situation or problem we're trying to figure out. It's not a matter of deciding to be in relationships or not for us. We're completely composed of relationships. We're structured by relationships. We function through relationships. Everything is in relationship. Nothing is outside of these relationships. And that's how the world works. That's how it really works. So what does this mean for government? Well, I think you can see government policy is going to have to catch up with the relational shift. All this research is now coming out of scientific studies and institutions, and a lot of the government policy was based on anti-relational thinking about how you solve problems, and they haven't worked very well. So it's very exciting that we're on the cusp of this big correction. And as for what this means to women, I think maybe you can get the drift of where this is going. Yeah. I write about that in the last chapter of Relational Reality, the relevance for women. And I start by talking about this famous test in 1953 that was done on perception by Professor Witkin. He was an experimental psychologist. And he designed two, they were like patterns, abstract patterns or designs. And the task was that you had to move certain movable parts around and align certain lines. And what he found in his results was very strongly gender correlated. And this was done in a university, and the male students, all the young men, focused on the lines in front of the design and did this aligning of it. And the co-eds, the young women, all of them almost, it's a very, very high percentage, tended to see the gestalt of the patterns. They saw the whole thing. And they could see the front images, the foreground figures, but they saw how they were embedded in what was around them and the totality of it. So, you know, one's not better than the other, but Professor Witkin put a patriarchal spin on the interpretation, on the findings, and he said, well, we can see from this scientific study that men are field-independent thinkers. And they're very strong and tough-minded and go right for the task that needs to be done. But the women are field-dependent thinkers. So they are not strong thinkers. They're influenced by, you know, what's not important, what's in the context, and there you go. And then, even worse, in the decade that followed that study, and it's famous because it's been replicated thousands of times around the world in psychology labs, and they always find this gender correlation. The women have a relational gestalt perception of reality, but all these other articles are written saying this proves that women can't think straight, they can't be trusted. They have this in common with children and primitive people, as they were called back then. So that's very interesting. You know, of course, indigenous people do see the world in this dynamic interrelatedness way because that's the way the world really is. After this detour we've taken in the West, some 2,000 years, society is moving toward us. It is starting to see reality the way women have always naturally perceived reality, which is in a relational way. And it's a huge task. It's not enough that all these scientific findings come out saying, oops, and even these, you know, very arrogant guys at the top of the heap saying, oh, we were wrong all this time. You know, a very interesting thing about that, which you can see in the study, they didn't play it up, but reading it as I read it, was those guys just couldn't see it. The evidence was right under their nose for about 20 years. really for about 20 years, there were all these pieces coming together saying, gee, the way we're thinking about biology is just not really fitting, but they couldn't get it. They couldn't move off the mechanistic onto this relational gestalt way of understanding what they've been studying their whole lives. It finally happened for another reason. But this is really, as they say, a huge task, and because it means we need to rethink the way we've been doing things, not only in government, but certainly all the institutions, systems of knowledge, community-based organizations, everything. The public sphere, as I'm sure you've noticed, evolved to be comfortable to the male psyche. So when I was a young woman, I'd say, as soon as I step out of my apartment, things seem a little skewed. Who thought this up? It's very hierarchical. You make artificial relationships of hierarchies, very clear, very efficient, but women have always noticed, yeah, but at what loss? So it's really going to happen this time, I think, because science, which is called the truth mode in the West, science is on our side this time. I don't think it's going to disappear. But for this to be a complete transition that reaches its fruition, it needs women. It needs the half of the population that naturally tends to see reality this way. Any problem that's being discussed, any government policy that needs to be designed, it's really a historic moment for us and the work that needs to be done. So I do think that society now badly needs us to apply this talent, and I hope that with this information, you will go out into the public sphere and speak from a place of very deep confidence of your relational perception, your relational analysis, and your relational vision. And when you do, there will be some men in the room who will roll their eyes and say, oh, God, what's she talking about? I mean, we've never had that kind of stuff on our list or criteria before. At which you can say, yes, and there's your problem. You never have had it before. You have to start thinking about this in a new way. And I think you can also see that this has everything to do with a new kind of politics that Marianne's talking about, and it has everything to do with the politics of nonviolence, deeply and broadly understood, including a sharp awareness of structural violence, where people are locked out of opportunities because the revenue stream has a big hole broken in it because the top has had their tax brackets lowered. So with no money, these people have no opportunities. That's structural violence. So this is all part of what we need in a relational analysis. And I hope that you'll go out and get involved in whatever ways you choose and let your relational light shine.
Charlene Spretnak.